else entirely. Outside the flagship's viewports, the three occupied human colony worlds sat quiet and still under Dominion control. The surrounding space looked exactly as calm and empty as it had since the attack. But somewhere out in that darkness, something was already moving, quietly, deliberately, and entirely outside anything Serath had prepared for. The first sign that something was wrong came on the fourth day after the attack. 3 Dominion supply ships, operating on a routine resupply run between the occupied colonies and a nearby forward base, simply stopped transmitting. No distress signal. No final communication. No wreckage detected on any scanner. They were there one moment and gone the next, as completely and cleanly as if they had never existed at all. Serath ordered an immediate investigation, still relatively unconcerned. Equipment failures happened. Navigation errors occurred. There were a dozen ordinary explanations for 3 missing ships that had nothing to do with human military action, but the investigation found nothing. No debris field, no emergency beacon, no trace of what had happened to 3 large supply vessels in a sector that should have been completely under Dominion control. Counselor Davin received the investigation report and read it twice, carefully before going to find Serath. 3 ships, he said, setting the report on the Admiral's desk. Gone simultaneously. No wreckage. No signals. In controlled Dominion space. Serath frowned at the report. Equipment failure across 3 ships at once is unlikely. It's essentially impossible, Davin said plainly. These ships were on separate routes, separated by considerable distance. Whatever happened to them happened deliberately, simultaneously and quietly enough that not one of them managed to send a single distress signal. The implication settled heavily between them. You're saying humans did this, Serath said. I'm saying the evidence points that way, Davin replied carefully. Simultaneous precision strikes, no evidence left behind, no warnings issued beforehand. This isn't a reactive military scrambling to respond. This is a coordinated force executing a pre-planned operation. Serath stood quietly for a moment, staring at the report. The small doubt that had begun forming 3 days ago grew slightly larger and harder to ignore. He ordered the fleet immediately into tighter defensive formations, pulling ships closer together, increasing sensor sweeps across all surrounding space. If humans were operating in the area, he wanted them detected and dealt with quickly before any further losses occurred. What he didn't realize, and what Davin was beginning to suspect, was that tightening the fleet formation was exactly what Admiral Kess had anticipated he would do. Kess watched the Dominion's defensive repositioning through long-range intelligence feeds, her expression showing quiet satisfaction. Predictable responses to pressure were one of the first things she'd looked for in an opponent, and Serath was giving her exactly what she expected. He pulled them tighter, her tactical officer reported. Good, Kess said simply. Tighter formation means slower response time to threats from multiple directions. Mark the new positions. She turned to her next set of orders, already moving to the second phase of the operation. The missing supply ships had served their purpose, not just as a practical blow to Dominion logistics, but as a deliberate signal. A quiet message delivered not through open broadcast but through action. We are already here. We are already moving. You didn't see us coming. On the Dominion flagship, the mood had shifted noticeably from the relaxed confidence of the attack's aftermath. Officers moved with slightly more urgency. Sensor teams watched their displays more carefully. The easy certainty that had filled the ship 3 days ago had been replaced by something quieter and less comfortable. Davin watched this shift happening around him and said nothing. He had warned Serath before the attack. He had raised concerns about human history, human resilience, and the danger of assuming emotional disorganization translated to military weakness. He had been dismissed each time. He wasn't interested in being right. He was interested in finding a way out of the situation that was clearly developing around them before it became significantly worse. He began quietly pulling historical records on previous conflicts involving humanity, not the ones the Serath had studied before the attack, which focused primarily on human governmental slowness and fleet disorganization, but older records from species that no longer existed as independent powers, records of conflicts that had started with confident strikes against human territory and ended very differently than the aggressors expected. The pattern was consistent across every case. Humans absorbed the initial blow, went quiet, and then responded not with the emotional, disorganized counterattack their enemies expected, but with something slower, more calculated, and far more damaging. Davin was deep in these records when the second alert came through. Another Dominion outpost had gone dark. Not a supply ship this time, but a full forward observation post staffed and equipped, sitting well within what should have been secure Dominion-controlled space. Gone. Clean. No warning. This time, even Serath couldn't find a comfortable alternative explanation. He stood at the main display, studying the position of the lost outpost relative to the lost supply ships, and for the first time since launching the attack he felt the cold, quiet weight of genuine uncertainty settling across his shoulders. "They're inside our controlled zone," he said quietly. "They've been inside it since at least yesterday," Devon replied carefully, not unkindly. "Possibly longer. Outside the viewport, the occupied human colonies sat exactly as before, quiet, controlled, seemingly secure. But somewhere in the space between stars something was moving with calm, deliberate precision, closer than Serath had believed possible, and far better organized than anything he had prepared to face. Serath had built his entire military career on the principle of overwhelming force. When faced with opposition, you hit harder, faster, and more completely than the enemy could respond to. It had worked every time against every opponent. Across every conflict the Dominion had fought in the last 2 decades. The problem he now faced was that Admiral Kess had built her career on an entirely different principle. Don't hit harder. Hit smarter. While Serath reorganized his fleet into tighter defensive formations and increased sensor sweeps across the surrounding space, Kess launched the first major phase of her retaliation, and it looked nothing like what the Dominion had prepared to defend against. Instead of massing human warships for a direct assault against Dominion fleet positions, Kess split her available forces into dozens of small, fast, highly maneuverable strike groups. Each group operated independently, with its own specific target and its own specific timing. None of them broadcast fleet-wide signals. None of them coordinated through open channels. They simply moved, struck, and disappeared over and over, across multiple locations simultaneously. Dominion communication relays, the systems that connected Serath's fleet to the wider Dominion network and allowed him to call for reinforcement, began going offline one by one, each falling without warning, each disappearing as cleanly as the supply ships before them. Supply routes that had been functioning smoothly since the initial attack were suddenly disrupted from multiple directions at once, leaving forward Dominion units, stranded without the resources they needed to maintain full operational capacity. 3 Dominion patrol groups sent to investigate, unusual readings in surrounding sectors lost, contact with the flagship within hours of departure, not destroyed, but electronically disabled and left drifting, unable to communicate or navigate effectively. Serath received each new report with increasingly controlled frustration. Every time his fleet moved to address one problem, 2 more appeared somewhere else. Every defensive adjustment he made seemed to open a new vulnerability that human strike teams immediately and quietly exploited. He called an emergency command meeting, gathering his senior officers around the tactical display. "They're everywhere," one officer reported, frustration clear in his voice. "Every time we reinforce one sector, they hit another. We can't establish a stable defensive perimeter because they're not attacking a perimeter. They're attacking everything around it. Because a perimeter requires them to come to us," Devon said quietly from the corner of the room, almost to himself. "They're making sure we have to come to them instead." Serath looked at him sharply. "Explain." Devon stepped closer to the tactical display, pointing carefully to the pattern of losses accumulating across the map. "Look at what they're targeting. Not our warships, not our strongest positions. Supply lines, communication relays, patrol groups. They're not trying to defeat our fleet in direct combat. They're dismantling everything that makes our fleet functional. By the time they're finished, our ships will be fully intact but completely unable to operate effectively." The room went quiet as the full weight of this sank in across the assembled officers. Serath stared at the display, at the growing pattern of losses spreading across positions that should have been well within secure Dominion space. "How many ships does Kess have?" he asked his intelligence officer. The officer checked his records carefully before answering. "Based on last known positioning data, significantly fewer than our fleet. They shouldn't have the numbers for an operation this broad. They don't need numbers, Devon said quietly. They need speed and precision, which they clearly have. Kess, watching the Dominion's increasingly reactive movements through intelligence feeds, made a small note on her operational map. Every adjustment Serath made confirmed what she had suspected from the beginning. He was a commander built for direct, powerful frontal engagements. Fluid, multidirectional pressure was something his training and experience hadn't fully prepared him to manage. She authorized the next phase without hesitation. More. Communication relays went dark across the Dominion's network. The remaining patrol groups still operating in surrounding sectors began experiencing navigation interference. Subtle, difficult to diagnose, but effective enough to slow their response times significantly. And then quietly, the human warships that had been operating in small independent strike groups began moving, not separately anymore, but carefully, gradually, drawing together into a larger coordinated force positioned between Serath's fleet and the nearest point from which Dominion reinforcements could realistically arrive, not blocking that route yet. Just sitting there, visible on long-range scanners, waiting. When Serath's scanner team reported the new human positioning, the Admiral stood completely still for a long moment, studying the display. They weren't attacking, they weren't retreating. They were simply making their presence known, showing him clearly and without any words exactly what they had built around his fleet while he had been busy responding to everything else. Devon looked at the same display and felt a familiar, uncomfortable sensation settle deep in his chest, one he had felt before, reading old historical records about conflicts with humanity. The sensation of watching a carefully set trap close around someone who hadn't realized they were standing in it. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I think it's time we seriously discussed our options." Serath didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on the display, where the human fleet sat quietly at the edge of scanner range, patient, organized, and positioned exactly where it would hurt most. For the first time in his military career, Grand Admiral Serath found himself doing something he had never expected to do in this conflict.